Number 10. Joker. During the events of Last Night on Earth, Joker actually teams up with Batman to help him save what is left of the world, which is now pretty much a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Despite being reduced to just a head in a jar, Joker proves to be pretty useful, even kind of becoming Batman's new robotic Robin. Batman ends up taking the Joker's head to a version of the Batcave, if not the Batcave, and gives Joker a Robin mech suit, attaching his head to it, which allows Joker to control the body and help Batman in his fight against the mysterious force known as Omega. No spoilers here though, so you can read Last Night on Earth for more. Number 9. Super Skrull. Not only has Super Skrull Kl'rt now joined the side of good, basically, serving Emperor Doric VIII, aka Emperor Hulkling, aka Teddy Altman, who himself rules the alliance of the Kree and Skrull forces and is a hero, but even before that, he lended a hand to help save the universe. When the Annihilation Wave threatened the existence of all life in the universe, Super Skrull joined the opposing forces and fought against both Annihilus and his wave and the Ultron Phalanx. It just goes to show that when a problem presents itself that is bigger than his own personal vendettas, Kl'rt can put aside his differences and even become a temporary or possibly permanent hero as he fights to protect the world. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it where we talk about when villains sometimes wear the mantle of hero, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. The Suicide Squad. During James Gunn's The Suicide Squad film, our lovable ragtag team of criminal misfits decide to band together, even when their mission is deemed finished by Amanda Waller, to continue the fight to save Corto Maltese and potentially the world from the wrath of Project Starfish, aka Starro the Conqueror. The final team in this film includes Bloodsport, Rick Flag, Harley Quinn, King Shark, Ratcatcher 2, Polka Dot Man, and Peacemaker. They are also joined by ally Milton at the end and the Thinker, who's kind of forced into helping them as they break into Jotunheim. While not all of them make it to that final showdown, all those still standing decide to go against orders and fight to protect the world against Starro. And guess what? They win. But I'm not going to spoil who's left alive, just in case. Just in case you still haven't seen this movie. And if you haven't seen The Suicide Squad, what are you doing with your life? Go watch it, so good. Number 7. Loki. During the Fear Itself event, Loki was the one who freed Thor, which enabled all of Midgard to be saved as they faced his villainous uncle called Borsin, the Serpent. The reason he was locked up was because he disagreed with his father, Odin. There was a prophecy that basically foretold Thor's death at the hands of the Serpent, which was a big part of the reason why Odin forbade Thor from continuing in the fight. However, Thor believed that it was his duty to protect Midgard, and Loki, who was Kid Loki at the time and on a path of redemption himself, decided to help his brother achieve his mission by freeing him. Without Loki's help, Thor would have been unable to confront the Serpent and would have therefore been unable to save the Earth. Thor, however, would die in the fight but would later return to life once more. You know, comics. Number 6. Mephisto. Mephisto actually ended up teaming up with Marvel's heroes in order to help them defeat his own son, Blackheart. Mephisto is all about making deals that usually cause a lot of harm to our heroes and generally a lot of chaos in the world that our heroes then must fight against. And yet this time around, Mephisto decided to join their side, not because he actually cared about saving the world really, but because he more refused to be outdone by his own son and admit defeat to him. The heroes who had fallen in the battle against Blackheart were resurrected and joined by Mephisto himself. However, even with Mephisto wanting to help, he still only did so while also marking the heroes with hell marks, forcibly turning them into his kind of heirs. After all, this is still Mephisto we're talking about here. The heroes succeeded in defeating Blackheart, but would then be indebted to Mephisto thereafter. Which obviously a lot of them, when they realized that, were like, I don't like that very much, but I guess hey, what can you do? Number 5. Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn might be leaning more towards hero more recently in the comics, but it's important to remember that she did start out as a villainous sidekick before becoming a supervillain in her own right, and even being considered the winner of Villain of the Year. That wasn't too long ago. That's just how bad she was. But even when she was regarded as a villain, Harley would still at times do things that could be considered heroic, challenging her own and others' sense of right and wrong when it felt necessary. Harley even helped to save the world at one point from her dear friend and, you know, sometimes girlfriend, Poison Ivy. Ivy had finally had enough and decided to use her powers to take over the world, controlling the minds of citizens using veggies, which were infected by her influence before being ingested by the populace. Harley was called upon by Batman and Catwoman to do something, as they knew she was likely the only person who would be able to influence Ivy herself and hopefully convince her to stop. And guess what? They were right. Harley succeeded, and in doing so saved the world from a loss of free will. Although, to be honest, Poison Ivy ruling the world seems like it wouldn't actually be too bad. Although, you wouldn't get to choose what you wanted to do with your life, so I guess that's pretty bad. I want to live my life. I don't want Ivy to live my life for me, you know? Number 4. Thanos. When the Cancerverse struck out and attempted to corrupt the 616 reality, Thanos was one of the characters who ended up banding together with the heroes to try and put a stop to it. Sometimes willingly, sometimes not so willingly. While not a hero himself, Thanos would very much be against the Cancerverse reality infecting his own, considering that the Cancerverse reality was warped so badly as a result of the decimation of death. And as kind of like a loyal follower of death, or sometimes kind of like a herald of death acting on death's behalf, Thanos wouldn't like that very much. Thanos is generally all about death, whether she be a lady or, you know, even just a concept. So a world without it, I can imagine, would greatly offend him. Thanos teamed up with Star-Lord and Nova using the Cosmic Cube to prevent the Cancerverse from invading the 616 reality, and ultimately risking themselves in the process, as they kind of became trapped in the Cancerverse as a result. Well, they kind of trapped Thanos there first, but don't worry, Thanos got out in the end. Why would you be worried about that? I don't know. Maybe you're a Thanos fan. I'm saying that like Thanos is a good guy. I'm like, don't worry. Thanos made it. He's alive. Thank goodness. Number 3. Black Adam. Black Adam is a villain whose purpose and motivation generally leads to him acting as a hero or an anti-hero at times. He was part of Lex Luthor's anti-crime syndicate in Justice League and stood against that team of villainous heroes from the reality of Earth 3, taking on Ultraman himself in a one-on-one fight. Black Adam has also worked with DC's heroes before, even though he was known initially as a Shazam or Captain Marvel villain in the comics. He's not only been an ally, but even a team member, actually joining the Justice League as a member at times. I think he's also been part of the Justice Society, so yeah, he's one of those guys that's constantly saving the world, but then also endangering the world, depending on the day. Number 2. Dr. Doom. During the events of the 2015 Secret Wars over at Marvel Comics, Dr. Doom ended up taking on the heavy responsibility of saving the world, or at least doing his best to save the world. He ends up accepting, or perhaps rather taking, the power needed in order to save the remnants of all the alternate universes which have basically collided in the incursion, creating a new place also known as Battleworld. Which is a new battle world, but we've heard the name Battle World before, just to be clear. Doom becomes the ruler of this new world and is now referred to as God Emperor Doom, and is worshipped as a god by many citizens whose lives he has managed to save and preserve, although they don't really know everything that happened before. Unfortunately, while Doom managed to save a lot of folks, the world was kind of a patchwork style-like quilt that was a bit of a mess in areas, to be honest. Eventually, the residents of this world realize that they are being somewhat manipulated by Doom, and many of them rise up in revolt, because they don't like that very much. Eventually, Doom battles against Mr. Fantastic, who takes Molecule Man's power for himself. Doom had been using this power prior to create and manage Battleworld, but Mr. Fantastic takes it to rebuild the multiverse properly, and all the universes within it, tweaking things here and there to improve them. Or improve them from, you know, Mr. Fantastic's point of view. But Doom was the one who actually prevented everything from getting full-on blowed up in the incursions to begin with, and so he did his part for sure. I mean, without Doom, the world probably wouldn't even exist anymore, so just saying. Number 1. Lex Luthor. In Justice League Unlimited, Lex gets a great moment of redemption when he is the one to destroy Darkseid during the series finale episode titled Destroyer. During the battle against Darkseid, Luthor shows up right at the end as Superman is about to have his heart carved out by Darkseid. Lex offers Darkseid the only thing that he really could, the thing Darkseid wants most: the anti-life equation. However, when Darkseid reaches out to take the equation from Lex, Luthor uses his newfound power to make them both disappear, defeating Darkseid and saving both Superman and the world, seemingly at the cost of his own life.
Coming in at number 10, we have Poison Ivy, specifically the version seen in the 2015 video game Batman Arkham Knight. As a recurring boss battle in the previous games in the series, Poison Ivy was one of the standout villains in a trilogy best known for making the player truly feel like they were fighting as Batman. In the grand finale, however, Poison Ivy no longer wanted to ally herself with the Scarecrow's plan to take over Gotham, initially refusing to join his League of Villains, and later even sacrificing her own life in order to help grow an ancient tree that will help work as an antidote to the Scarecrow's toxins plaguing the city. At the end of the day, this version of Poison Ivy just cared about her plants and the greenery of Gotham, and was willing to sacrifice her life for the good of the city as long as her friends could live. Coming in at number 9, we have Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, aka the Red Hulk. For years, General Ross had been the lead military commander in charge of tracking down and capturing the Incredible Hulk, and has been a persistent thorn in Bruce Banner's side. But following the death of his daughter and the Hulk's exile into outer space, Ross was manipulated by MODOK and several other supervillains into becoming the Red Hulk, in case his nemesis should ever return. And while for a time the Red Hulk was a feared adversary for the heroes who remained on Earth, Ross would eventually see to reason and become a functioning member of the Avengers, teaming up with them to save Earth from the power of the Infinity Gauntlet, and proving that a Hulk doesn't have to be green to occasionally do some good. Coming in at number 8, we have Dr. Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow. Best known for being a fear-based nemesis of Batman's, Dr. Jonathan Crane found himself in the unique position to help save the entire universe during the DC Comics event known as Blackest Night. With the Green Lantern Corps facing off against an undead army of Black Lanterns, it was discovered that Scarecrow's exposure to fear toxin made him one of the few beings in existence capable of being undetected by the Black Lanterns. To make use of this quirk, Scarecrow was gifted a yellow power ring, and allowed to join the Sinestro Corps as they briefly teamed up with their rival colors, allowing Jonathan Crane to use his mastery of fear for the good of the entire DC multiverse. Coming in at number 7, we have the infamous Norman Osborn. Perhaps best known as being the alter ego of Spider-Man's nemesis, the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn has long been one of the biggest threats in the Marvel Universe, manipulating events from afar as the feared CEO of Oscorp. Following the invasion of Earth by the Skrull army, Norman found himself suddenly in the public eye and with goodwill after being the one to personally defeat the Skrull Queen. Norman would use this influence to lead the Dark Avengers as the Iron Patriot, a twisted version of superheroics that would help protect the Earth from several world-ending threats, but also saw Norman slowly giving himself more and more power over the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. So, does it still count as saving the world if you did it for bad reasons? And we'll let the philosophers debate that one. Coming in at number 6, we have the iconic X-Men villain Apocalypse. Born thousands of years ago under the name En Saba Nur as one of the very first mutants, Apocalypse has long been an ancient thorn in the X-Men's side, as he often tries to rally his Horsemen of the Apocalypse and take over the entire planet. But with the new mutant status quo seeing all of mutant kind suddenly living at peace and with many quarrels ended, Apocalypse has surprisingly enough been one of the biggest supporters of the new island of Krakoa. Claiming it's the realization of everything he's always wanted for mutants, Apocalypse put down his arms against the X-Men and instead only wields his blade now to fight for Krakoa and mutant influence, protecting the island from threats that might seek to destroy the new mutant homeland. Coming in at number 5, we have ATROCITUS, leader of the Red Lanterns. A violent warrior that became consumed with rage after he believed the Guardians of the Universe let his family die, ATROCITUS formed the Red Lanterns as an outlet for his fury and as a way to destroy both the Green Lantern Corps and their most esteemed warrior at the time, Sinestro. This rage would often bring him into conflict with the various Lanterns, but ATROCITUS was luckily able to be reasoned with during the Blackest Night event, which saw the Red Lanterns grudgingly teaming up with the rest of the color spectrum against the undead Black Lantern army. And hey, if an unstoppable force of zombie aliens can't bring enemies together, what can? Coming in at number 4, we have the villainous Superman of the Injustice universe. In the Injustice branch of the DC multiverse that's been depicted in both comic books and video games, the Man of Steel is not somebody to be messed with. After being tricked by the Joker into killing his own wife and daughter, this Superman has gone full villain, taking over the world with brutal efficiency and force. In the sequel video game, Injustice 2, however, Superman once again finds himself having to be the hero when he is broken out of Batman's prison in order to defend the world against a Brainiac invasion. This Superman may want to rule the world, but there needs to be an actual planet to rule, and so he grudgingly helps the heroes that imprisoned him fight back against a new threat that might just be too big for all of them to handle. Coming in at number 3, we have Dr. Otto Octavius, specifically the version seen in Sam Raimi's 2004 film, Spider-Man 2. This movie is one of my favorite superhero films ever, and a large part of that is due to its complex and sympathetic villain in the form of Dr. Octopus. This version of Doc Ock isn't robbing banks or threatening people just because he's evil, but because he's lost control of the mechanical arms attached to his body while being overwhelmed with grief from the death of his wife. In the end, however, Otto is able to regain control of his body and realizes what his ego and drive to create the fusion generator have done, and willingly sacrifices himself to save both New York City and the recently unmasked Peter Parker. Still brings a tear to my eye just thinking about it. Coming in at number 2, we've got a special shout out to practically every Batman villain except the Joker. During the 2014 event known as Batman Endgame, no relation to the MCU, the Joker has finally decided to end his years-long battle with Batman, feeling that the Caped Crusader no longer valued their relationship. Planning to kill everyone in Gotham City, the Joker started a parade of murder, with the bat symbol hanging upside down in the sky above Gotham, a symbol for all of Batman's enemies to gather if the Batman ever died. In a twist, however, it was Batman himself who lit the signal, knowing of his villain's pact, and makes an offer to the assembled rogues gallery to help take back the city from Joker. It's one of the best moments in Batman comics over the last decade, and seeing all of Gotham's villains team up against the Clown Prince of Crime is truly something to behold. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the iconic Darkseid. If there was any DC villain that you would expect to never ally with the side of good, it would be Darkseid. But during the 2001 Our Worlds at War event, that's exactly what took place. When the villain Imperiex threatened to reignite the Big Bang and completely reset the DC universe, Darkseid grudgingly realized the destruction of the universe would mean he'd never be able to accomplish his own evil goals. Thus, he proposed an alliance with both Lex Luthor and Superman to help defeat the universe-exploding threat, using his boom tubes to hold off Imperix's energy attacks while the superheroes attempted to stop the villain once and for all. And while Darkseid and Superman would go back to being eternal enemies after this, it was still nice to see them working together, even if it was only for a couple issues.
Number 10, Shocker. Herman Schultz often comes across more as a villain by circumstance rather than someone intent on doing harm. When he was a child, his parents died, leaving him to fend for himself, and like many economically disadvantaged youths are sometimes forced to do, he turned to crime to support himself. He wasn't a particularly skilled criminal until he used materials in the prison workshop to create his vibro-shock gauntlets, which allow him to open safes as well as shoot concentrated blasts of air that can be used to destroy walls or deal forceful blows from a distance. Although other villains seem to relish in being criminals, with Shocker it usually feels more like he's gonna turn to the reader and say, well, it's a living! He has done some bad things, but he has been shown to have a sense of honor as well, such as in Guardians of the Galaxy number 29, when he and some of his fellow supervillains raided Avengers Mansion and were forced to team up with the Guardians to defeat a group of aliens that showed up and attacked both groups. When the fight was over, Doc Ock tried to convince the villains to turn on the Guardians, but Shocker and the other villains refused, not wanting to hurt the heroes after they had saved their lives. He has had multiple opportunities to kill Spider-Man, but has chosen not to, such as in Spider-Man number 83, when he opened a window and came face to face with an incapacitated Spider-Man. He basically said, Nah, too easy, and left. It makes one wonder what kind of a person he'd be if he'd been afforded the same opportunities as some of the superheroes when he was younger. He could probably do quite a bit of good with his gauntlets, and frankly would probably get more respect as a C-list hero rather than a C-list villain. Number 9. Mr. Freeze. There is perhaps no more sympathetic Batman villain than Mr. Freeze. Although he has had several origins over the years, the most iconic one is that Dr. Victor Freeze was a simple scientist trying to find a cure for his wife Nora's deadly disease. In a tragic accident, Victor became incapable of surviving at temperatures above sub-zero and was forced to create a cryosuit in order to survive. He has developed a freeze gun capable of encasing his victims in ice and turned to a life of crime in order to fund his research and try and save his wife. Considering that the only reason he is working as a criminal is to save the people he loves, and how many times across different media he has been shown working with Batman rather than against him, one can't help but wonder what would happen if he decided to protect Gotham rather than terrorize it. Imagine how easy it would be for Mr. Freeze to stop most villains by simply freezing their feet to the ground and waiting for the police. Heck, if he sold his freezing technology to climate scientists, he could refreeze the polar ice caps, become the savior of mankind, and earn enough money to fund his research and save Nora. Number 8. Spot. It's amazing how similar the origins of a hero and a villain can be. Listen to this one. A brilliant scientist begins experimenting with dangerous radiation, and during a test gone wrong, is granted strange powers that will change their life forever. In Jonathan Owen's case, rather than working with gamma radiation, he was trying to reproduce the powers of the vigilante the Cloak, and opened a portal that transported him to a dimension of half light and half dark. He escaped, but was changed, covered with black spots which acted as portable space warps, allowing him to teleport himself or anyone or anything he wants. A common way he uses this power is to redirect a hero's blows, tricking them into punching themselves in the face. Spot's initial experiment was funded by the Kingpin, so when he emerged for the first time, he fought Spider-Man and Black Cat in order to protect his employer. But what if his experiment was being funded by someone a little less villainous, like say Tony Stark? Would he still have become a villain? Personally, I think his portal powers would be more useful on the good guy's side rather than the villain's. Sure, he can use a portal to rob a bank, but imagine being able to rescue people from a burning building with ease. Frankly, not many people think of Spot as a very effective villain, so why not use those abilities for something that would actually benefit humanity? You know, like scientists are supposed to do? Number 7. Mysterio. Quentin Beck started out as a gifted stuntman and special effects artist, but grew disillusioned with his career due to the lack of recognition his field received. Man, so far this origin story is aging really well. He decided to turn to a life of crime, allying himself with the Tinkerer and disguising himself as an alien in order to steal secrets from high-profile targets and sell them to the highest bidder. When his plan was foiled by Spider-Man, Quentin vowed revenge. He returned sometime later, posing as a superhero named Mysterio, and began framing Spider-Man for crimes in order to get his revenge. The Master of Illusion has tangled with the webbed wall crawler several times over the years, but frankly, if he wasn't so obsessed with getting revenge on Spidey, he probably could have just become an actual superhero. Now, I'm not saying he would be able to join the Avengers, but considering that his main motivator is recognition, and most of his schemes have just been convoluted scams that have ended with him being humiliated, he would have been more likely to achieve his dreams if he had put half as much effort into actually being a hero rather than trying to fake being a hero while also framing Spider-Man. Number 6. The Riddler. When Edward Nygma was a child, he quickly showed that he had a gifted and powerful mind. His father was unable to come to terms with his son's brilliance and would abuse Edward, claiming that Edward's academic achievements were a result of him cheating. This caused Edward to develop a compulsive need to prove his intelligence, which resulted in him becoming the Riddler, a supervillain with the uncontrollable urge to leave riddles at the scene of his crimes. This tendency to leave clues usually led to him getting caught by Batman. He eventually overcame this compulsion and reformed, becoming an accomplished private detective in Gotham. He still has a massive ego, but he has helped Batman solve several murders over the years, and has even saved a few lives, including the intended victim of a copycat villain named Conundrum and Dick Grayson. Considering how much he has accomplished as a good guy, die, it makes one wonder what he could have been capable of if he had been raised in a more nurturing environment and had put his genius mind towards good sooner in his life. Unfortunately, all of this character development was undone in the New 52 reboot of the DC Universe, and he is once again an unrepentant supervillain. Number 5. Poison Ivy. Although in her pre-crisis iteration, Poison Ivy used her plant powers for the singular purpose of accumulating personal wealth, her post-crisis version is a bit more interesting and is the version that we're talking about today. When Pamela Isley was experimented on by the mad Dr. Jason Woodrow, she developed her ability to control plants, as well as her ability to seduce and control people with the use of pheromones and kill them with a poison kiss. She commits crimes in order to further her goal of making the world safer for her beloved plants. Now this may sound noble at first, but you have to keep in mind she wants to accomplish this by killing all of humanity. She is an eco-fascist, on a scale that makes Ra's al Ghul look like a pacifist. She tangled with Batman several times in this continuity, but did have moments of compassion and humanity, most notably in the No Man's Land story arc, when Gotham was destroyed in an earthquake, and she took over Robinson Park and even took in 16 orphans, feeding and keeping them safe and treating them like her own children. She delights in killing, often feeding her victims to her man-eating plants, but if she could be convinced to be a little more focused and less homicidal, she could be one of Earth's greatest heroes. She has been shown to be capable of creating tropical paradises in the middle of deserts. Just imagine the impact she could have on greenhouse gases if she started using this power to instantly replace clear-cut forests. In the New 52 reboot, she was brought a little closer to a hero as her motivations were changed so that she no longer wishes to destroy humanity for her plants, but wants to take out the massive polluters to make the Earth better for everyone, humanity included. Her methods are still a bit too extreme for her to be considered a superhero, but hey, progress is progress. Number 4. Purple Man. Zebediah Kilgrave was a Soviet spy tasked with stealing an experimental nerve gas from the Americans. While attempting this, a guard opened fire on Kilgrave, accidentally hitting the vial of nerve gas. It turned Zebediah purple and gave him the ability to manipulate the wills of others using his pheromones. Zebediah has used this power for truly horrifying purposes. The Purple Man is beyond redemption at this point, but the ability to make people do whatever you tell them can be used for good just as easily as it can be used for evil. We got a taste of how Purple Man could be using his powers for good in the Jessica Jones television series, but a more consistent example of this power being used for non-sociopathic purposes is his daughter Kara. Kara has the same powers as her father, but rather than be a villain, she instead became the superhero Purple Girl. She was a longtime member of Alpha Flight before eventually joining the Thunderbolts and adopting the new alias Persuasion. Further proof that I can tie any video to Alpha Flight. Number 3. Dr. Octopus. One of Spider-Man's oldest foes, first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 3. Dr. Otto Octavius was a gifted scientist before the 4 mechanical arms he created to help with his experiments were fused to his body, driving him insane and into a life of crime. Doc Ock actually did become a superhero when he swapped bodies with Peter Parker and chose to become the superior Spider-Man. Although still a temperamental egomaniac, Octavius was able to do a lot of good as the new webbed wallcrawler, eventually even sacrificing his life so that Peter could regain control of the body and save the day from the Goblin King. Otto soon returned to life, but unfortunately returned to a life of villainy soon after. It must be frustrating for Spider-Man to fight his old foe now that he knows for a fact that Otto could be and was an amazing superhero for a time. Number 2. Lex Luthor. Superman's greatest foe is a billionaire industrial genius who consistently comes up with evil schemes to feed his ego under the guise of helping humanity. Like Elon Musk if he actually knew how to invent stuff. Lex has battled the heroes of the Justice League for years, but eventually ended up saving the Earth from the crime syndicate. This shifted public opinion on the supervillain, and deciding that he liked the attention, Luthor became a hero and even managed to force his way onto the Justice League. When Superman died in the events of DC Rebirth, Luthor decided to take over the mantle, showing up in Superman's cape and in a supersuit with the House of L symbol on its chest. Despite the objections of the pre-Flashpoint Superman, who had been transported to this new reality, it's a long story. Lex operated as a Superman for a while before his resentment of his fellow heroes' mistrust led him to return to evil. It's interesting to know that the only thing preventing Lex from saving the Earth is his own narcissism and ego, and I'm sure it actually makes his evil schemes even more frustrating for the Man of Steel to put up with. Number 1. CLAYFACE. If there's one thing I hate about DC Comics, it's having to keep track of all the different continuities and origins that are constantly changing every few years. Let's go with CLAYFACE's post-Flashpoint origin for the purposes of this list. Basil Carlo was a successful and talented actor who was disfigured in a car accident just as his film career was really starting to take off. He began using a chemical putty called Renew, which allowed him to reshape his face in order to try and preserve his career. When his supply ran out, he attempted to steal it from the Gotham chemical plant and ended up being doused in the dangerous chemical. This transformed him into the villain CLAYFACE. CLAYFACE is able to shapeshift in order to impersonate anyone he wants, as well as take the form of anything he wants, transforming his arms into dangerous weapons or suffocating his enemies by taking on a dense mud-like form. He was one of Batman's most dangerous villains for years, but the Dark Knight was able to see his potential for good. He offered him a spot on the Gotham Knights, and CLAYFACE was able to make the transition from supervillain to superhero. Unlike other villains who have dabbled in good deeds but have ultimately returned to evil, CLAYFACE actually seems to prefer being a good guy. Not only has he developed lasting friendships with his teammates, but he has also managed to convince other villains to try and redeem themselves when he was able to get the villains Firefly, Knockout, Cheshire, and Killer Croc to help him take out the evil Peacekeeper drones in the Fear State story arc. Villains have an unfortunate habit of returning to evil, but let's hope CLAYFACE is able to resist the temptation and remains one of Gotham's most unlikely heroes.
Coming in at number 10, we have James Proudstar, aka the hero Warpath. A mutant that developed superhuman strength, Warpath idolized the X-Men as a young man when his older brother, Thunderbird, joined the team. However, Thunderbird tragically died on his very first mission, an incident that caused Warpath to begin to hate the X-Men and become obsessed with killing Professor Charles Xavier. Briefly joining with the villain group called the Hellions, Warpath would eventually see the error of his ways and return to the side of good, frequently fighting alongside the New Mutants to help save both humanity and all of mutant kind. Coming in at number 9, we have Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow. That's right, while she might be best known now for being an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and being one of the most resourceful members on the Avengers team, the Black Widow still has an awful lot of red in her ledger. In her very first appearance, Black Widow was attempting to rob Iron Man's tech with the help of another villainous thief at the time, Hawkeye. While Hawkeye would see the error of his ways a bit quicker than Natasha, she would go on to be brainwashed by the infamous Red Room, training her to be a remorseless assassin, skills that she now uses today as a member of the Avengers to try and make up for her bloody past. Coming in at number 8, we have Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier. Originally believed to have perished during Captain America's World War II era adventures, Bucky was in fact captured and brainwashed by the villainous organization Hydra, turning him into the perfect weapon and such a deadly assassin that he would become infamous throughout the Marvel Universe, even rumored to be involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It was only through the dedication of his best friend Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, that Bucky was finally able to remember who he is and abandon his villainous career. While he's since started using his lethal training for the side of good, the Winter Soldier is still a brutal opponent, and with an arm made out of pure vibranium, surviving one of his punches is something that his enemies should definitely still be worried about. Coming in at number 7, we have the infamous Harley Quinn. Originally a psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum who took a particular fascination in the Joker, Harleen Quinzel was manipulated over time into breaking the Joker free and killing a guard, before the Joker pushed her into a similar vat of chemicals to the one that had created him in the first place. Reborn as the Joker's second in command, Harley believed she was in love for years as she helped the Joker with his schemes and war against Batman, but would eventually come to realize that the Joker was a violent man with no genuine feelings for her. Ever since, Harley has struggled to keep doing the right thing and has become more of an anti-hero than an outright villain, fighting back against the Clown Prince of Crime that took so much away from her. Coming in at number 6, we have Selina Kyle, aka the one and only Catwoman. Originally just a cat burglar in a slightly more elaborate costume, Catwoman terrorized Gotham City for a while as her heists grew more and more elaborate and continued to be foiled by that pesky Batman. Eventually, however, Selina would wind up prioritizing those she cares about more than her thieving ways or connections to other supervillains. And combined with her growing romance with Batman after years of merely being flirty rivals, it finally looks like Catwoman might be permanently fighting for the good guys from now on. Just, you know, don't blame her if anything too expensive goes missing. Coming in at number 5, we have Patrick O'Brien, aka Plastic Man. Typically seen as one of the comic relief members of the Justice League, Plastic Man's origins actually began with him being a common criminal, a safecracker for a band of burglars. Following a robbery gone wrong, Patrick was shot, covered in chemicals, and left for dead, unintentionally causing his transformation into Plastic Man. Capable of completely manipulating his body down to the molecular level, Plastic Man is essentially indestructible given how flexible he's able to become. Completely impervious to physical damage, Plastic Man has also shown a complete immunity to mind control or telepathic suggestions, as his brain isn't made of enough solid matter to control. All of these facts combined make Plastic Man a very redeemed superhero. Coming in at number 4, we're gonna have to go with the famous, or should I say infamous, Deadpool. Originally designed to be a dark but slightly sarcastic villain for the X-Force comic series, Deadpool has over the years turned into a charming and fourth wall breaking anti-hero that's always trying to do some form of good, but sometimes shows it in some pretty odd and violent ways. However, the most notable aspect of Deadpool's powers and what makes him so powerful is his sheer inability to die. No matter how many times you stab him, shoot him, or chop some bits off, Deadpool will always bounce back with at least a couple of bad jokes. Add in his not insignificant skill with all manner of firearms and weaponry, and you've got an explosive anti-hero you do not want to mess with. Coming in at number 3, we have Pietro Maximoff, aka Quicksilver. A super speedster with a complicated backstory that's gone back and forth on both his parentage and whether his powers are mutant in origin, Quicksilver was one of the original members of Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, before eventually being convinced of Magneto's villainy, I wonder if the phrase evil mutants had anything to do with that, and joined the Avengers instead, at the very same time as early member Hawkeye. With nearly all of his abilities focused on making his body and movement as aerodynamic as possible, Quicksilver's speed has been theorized to be limitless, even if his powers don't quite compare to all of the extra abilities of the DC Universe's Speed Force. Nevertheless, Quicksilver is incredibly fast for the Marvel Universe, and let's keep hoping that he continues to run for the good guys. Coming in at number 2, we have Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch. Originally believing herself to be the mutant daughter of Magneto, Wanda is in reality one of the most powerful magic wielders in the Marvel multiverse, and a conduit for chaos magic that allows her to rewrite reality to her will. And while she was one of the first members of Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, given the whole thought he was her dad thing, she'd eventually become an essential member of the Avengers, even if she does occasionally have brief forays into more anti-hero-like activities, such as the whole M-Day scenario. But hey, nobody's perfect. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we've got Eddie Brock, aka the iconic Venom. From Spider-Man's edgier looking costume, to a bulky web-slinging supervillain, to the lethal protector of San Francisco, Venom has held more jobs over the years than anyone else. But with the recent defeat of the dark symbiote god known as Null, Venom has become the leader of the symbiotes entirely, and thus has one of the most unstoppable armies in the entire Marvel universe at his beck and call, alongside the fourth dimension spanning ability to interact with any symbiote throughout both space and time. Let's hope that Venom keeps on leaning on the hero part of anti-hero, because otherwise, all of these additional power boosts that he's gone through recently could wind up being a huge problem for the rest of the Marvel universe.